In the quiet valleys of ancient China, where bamboo swayed gently in the wind and ink dried slowly on worn scrolls, a child was born, not to royalty or wealth, but to wisdom. His name would echo not through conquests or kingdoms, but through thought, virtue, and timeless truth. He was not a warrior. He built no empire. He had no crown. Yet his words would outlast emperors, and his ideas would become the foundation of a civilization. This was a man who believed that strength did not lie in weapons, but in character. That harmony was not imposed by force, but nurtured through kindness, respect, and understanding. His name was Confucius. Born into a world of chaos and disunity, Confucius sought order not in laws, but in ethics. He looked at society not as a machine to control, but as a family to guide. He believed that a good life began with personal responsibility, with honoring one's parents and cultivating inner balance. To him, government was not about authority. It was about example. He was a teacher, but more than that, he was a mirror, reflecting back to the world what it could be if guided by virtue. He asked deep questions. What is justice? What is loyalty? What does it mean to live with integrity? And he offered answers through the simplicity of daily rituals, through respect for the past, and through an unshakable belief in humanity's potential to improve. Confucius did not seek followers. He sought understanding. And yet, generations would follow him, not out of obligation, but because his wisdom resonated with something eternal. Over 2,000 years have passed, and still his ideas breathe through schools, governments, families, and hearts. From emperors to commoners, his voice has shaped the East, and now speaks to the world. This is not merely the biography of a man, it is the unfolding of a philosophy, a journey through thought, virtue, and vision. This is the story of Confucius, the man who became a moral compass for humanity. Confucius was born in 581 BCE in the small state of Lu, in what is now Shandong province in northeastern China. It was a time of political fragmentation and moral decline, an era historians would later call the Spring and Autumn period, a time when kings had lost their power and the land was divided among warring feudal lords. Disorder reigned across the land. Loyalty gave way to opportunism. Rituals had become hollow gestures. Violence was common, and virtue was rare. Into this chaos, a child was born with no wealth, no title, and no apparent destiny. His family, once noble, had fallen into poverty. His father, a respected warrior of advanced age, died when Confucius was only 3 years old, leaving him to be raised by his mother in humble conditions. Yet even as a boy, Confucius showed signs of an extraordinary mind and a spirit that refused to be dimmed by circumstance. He was drawn to learning, not only from books and scrolls, but from life itself. He observed the world with keen eyes, always asking questions. Why did some men command others without virtue? Why did rituals exist if their meaning was forgotten? Why did rulers not rule with righteousness? In a society that seemed to be losing its soul, he felt a deep yearning to rediscover its heart. Though his family was poor, his mother ensured he received an education. Young Confucius studied history, poetry, music, archery, and ritual, subjects considered the foundation of a gentleman's character. He learned not only how to read, but how to reflect. Not just how to obey, but how to discern. Even in his youth, he believed that education was not a privilege for the elite, but a path toward moral betterment open to all. What set Confucius apart from other boys was not brilliance alone, but his reverence for what had come before. He admired the Zhou dynasty, a period of ancient virtue and harmony. He believed that if people could reconnect with those values, honor, loyalty, respect, humility, they could restore order in a fractured world. Even at a young age, he was already seeking answers not just for himself, but for his country. He was thoughtful but not timid, respectful but not submissive. As he grew, he began to speak of the importance of filial piety, the honoring of one's parents, not as a rule, but as a root. He believed that society began in the family, and that the family was a school for the heart. A son who respected his father would grow into a minister who served his ruler with loyalty, and a ruler who loved his people like children would create a nation built not on fear, but on virtue. In a time of warlords and corruption, such ideas were radical, but Confucius was not afraid to be different. He did not fight with weapons, but with words. He did not seek to destroy the old ways, but to restore their meaning. He believed that true reform began not with rebellion, but with reflection. By the time he was a young man, his reputation for wisdom and moral clarity had begun to grow. People began to listen, not because he demanded attention, but because he deserved it. And though he had yet to hold public office, Confucius was already becoming what he would remain for the rest of his life: a teacher, a thinker, and a moral compass in a world desperately searching for direction. As Confucius entered adulthood, he faced the same crossroads that confronted many young men of his time: how to live with purpose in a world without order. But unlike others who sought power through allegiance or profit through compromise, Confucius remained devoted to a higher calling. He chose the path of learning, not just for himself, but for all those who would come after. In his early years, he worked in modest government roles: storekeeper, clerk, manager of public lands. Though low in rank, he took these positions seriously, believing that even the smallest duties were opportunities to practice virtue. A just measure of grain, a fair distribution of goods, a clear account of public funds. These were not only acts of efficiency, but acts of righteousness. For Confucius, morality was not reserved for kings and sages. It was meant for every moment, every decision, every action. But his passion lay in teaching. He began to gather students, not for wealth, not for status, but to pass on the ideals he believed could change the world. In a time when education was confined to the nobility, Confucius opened his arms to all who were willing to learn. In teaching, he once said, there should be no class distinction. Farmers, merchants, sons of artisans, they all found a place at his feet, where scrolls were read, ethics debated, and minds awakened. He did not lecture with arrogance. He guided with humility. He did not impose answers. He asked questions. His method was not to dictate, but to invite reflection. "Are you not learning when you review what you know?" he would ask. "Is it not joy to learn something and apply it?" His students learned not only poetry and rites, but how to be better men, how to lead with integrity, how to listen with empathy, how to live with restraint. What Confucius gave them was more than information. He gave them formation. He turned education into a means of self-cultivation, where knowledge and virtue walked side by side. The gentleman is modest in speech, but exceeds in action, he taught. Do not worry if others do not recognize you. Worry only that you do not deserve to be recognized. These were not merely sayings. They were seeds of character, planted deep in the hearts of his disciples. The teacher soon became a moral force. His reputation for wisdom began to spread far beyond Lu. Scholars came from distant states to learn from him. Some would later become advisors to kings, and others would establish their own schools. But all would call him master. For them, Confucius was not simply a man of ideas. He was a model of virtue, consistent, courageous, compassionate. Though the world around him remained chaotic, within the quiet circle of his teaching, order took root. In his humble home, among shelves of bamboo scrolls and sounds of ink-scratching parchment, a new vision of society was forming, one built not on power, but on principle. Still, Confucius did not believe that knowledge alone could change the world. It had to be lived. That is why he longed for public service, not for glory, but to test his ideas in the furnace of reality. He believed that a ruler guided by virtue could bring peace to a state, and that good governance began with self-governance. If the people are led by laws, he said, they will try to avoid punishment. If they are led by virtue, they will develop a sense of shame and become upright. Confucius dreamed of serving a wise and willing ruler, one who would listen not to flatterers, but to reason, who would place justice above ambition and care for the people above personal pride. With this dream in his heart, he would soon leave the safety of the classroom and step into the storm of politics, where ideals would meet resistance and the soul of a teacher would be tested by the world of kings. Confucius had long believed that virtue was not only a personal pursuit but a national necessity. The moral development of individuals, he taught, could ripple outward, transforming families, guiding communities, and ultimately shaping entire states. But to bring those ideas from scroll to society, from theory to action, he knew he would have to step into the world of politics. It would not be an easy path. In his early 50s, Confucius was invited to serve in an official capacity in the state of Lu. He was appointed Minister of Justice and, briefly, even rose to the position of acting Prime Minister. At last, he had the opportunity to implement his ideas of righteous rule, to prove that virtue could be a guiding force in government. He brought with him not a hunger for control, but a hunger for integrity. Corruption was not to be tolerated. Those who abused their power were removed from office. Criminals, even those of noble birth, were judged fairly. Rituals and ancestral rites were restored not as hollow performances, but as meaningful expressions of unity and respect. The people noticed. Crime declined. Trade increased. Nobles began to reconsider their arrogance. A sense of order returned, not through fear, but through fairness. Confucius showed that when leaders lead by example, the people naturally follow. But righteousness is rarely welcome in courts where ambition reigns. Confucius's reforms unsettled powerful families. His refusal to flatter or compromise made him enemies. He insisted that ministers should serve the people, not their own interests. That rulers should earn loyalty, not demand it. In a political system riddled with self-interest, such ideas were seen not as noble, but as dangerous. The final blow came when the Duke of Lu, Confucius's own ruler, accepted a lavish gift from a rival state, 80 beautiful women and a team of fine horses. Distracted by these luxuries, the Duke abandoned state affairs and fell into indulgence. For Confucius, this was not only a betrayal of duty, it was the death of moral leadership. Rather than remain and serve a ruler who had turned away from virtue, Confucius chose to leave. It was a painful decision. He had waited years for the chance to guide a government through justice and principle, but he would not compromise his values, even for power. He resigned from his post, packed his scrolls, and set out on a journey that would last for more than a decade. He traveled from state to state, offering his counsel to rulers across the land. He spoke of harmony through ethics, of governing by virtue instead of force. But few were willing to listen. Some saw him as a relic of the past. Others dismissed him as naive. One ruler even mocked him for being too honest to succeed. There were times when he was refused shelter, times when he and his disciples went hungry. At moments, he felt abandoned by the very world he sought to heal. Yet through it all, Confucius never stopped teaching, never stopped writing, never stopped believing that one day a virtuous ruler would arise who would hear him. His disciples watched with admiration as their master endured hardship without bitterness, rejection without hatred. In a world where survival demanded compromise, Confucius remained incorruptible. And though no throne ever sat him beside it, no crown ever adorned his brow, he became something rarer than a king. A man whose values could not be bought, whose purpose could not be shaken. In time, his journey through the states would end. He would return home older, wearier, and still without the political success he had once sought. But Confucius had not failed. For while the courts of power had closed their doors to him, he had opened thousands of minds and planted the seeds of a moral revolution that would endure long after kings and ministers were gone. After stepping away from official life, Confucius entered what would become the most defining chapter of his journey, not as a minister or reformer, but as a sage in motion. With a band of loyal disciples by his side, he set out across the fractured lands of ancient China, not in search of comfort or recognition, but in search of a ruler willing to build a government founded on virtue. It was a journey of years, not days, of patience, not triumph, and it tested not only his endurance, but his faith in humanity's potential to choose wisdom over power, humility over pride. Confucius visited one feudal state after another, Cao, Song, Zheng, Chen Nataitao, Kai, offering his counsel to kings and dukes, each time presenting the same vision: that a harmonious society could only arise when leaders governed themselves before seeking to govern others. That a country flourished not from conquest, but from the cultivation of virtue among its people. He did not offer clever schemes or military strategies. He offered something much more rare: clarity. And yet, few listened. Some rulers were polite but dismissive. Others feared his ideas would weaken their grip on power. One even plotted to have him assassinated. In the state of Kuang, he was mistaken for a political enemy and nearly killed by an angry mob. He escaped, not with weapons, but with words, and the calm authority of a man who feared no injustice. Despite the rejection, Confucius never gave up. "If the world is without the way," he once said, "then I shall strive to walk it alone." And so he did. Through rain and dust, through hunger and illness, he kept walking. When inns were closed to him, he slept beneath the stars. When food was scarce, he shared his last grain with his disciples. And through it all, he continued to teach. Wherever he went, children gathered. Farmers paused their plowing to listen. Wandering scholars followed him from town to town, carrying bamboo scrolls, recording his words. They called him master, not because he commanded them, but because he enlightened them. He spoke of ren, humaneness, as the highest virtue. He taught that a person must cultivate themselves like a gardener tends a tree, with patience, with care, with humility. That one's character is shaped not by circumstances, but by the constancy of one's intention. He reminded them that rituals, when filled with meaning, bind society together, just as filial piety connects generations in a lineage of respect. He showed them how to ask the right questions, how to live with purpose, how to lead without dominating, and how to serve without losing dignity. It was during these years of wandering that Confucius began shaping the collection of teachings that would later become the Analects. Not written by him, but by his disciples, word for word, memory by memory. A book born not from royal decree, but from fireside conversation, from daily reflection, from the lived wisdom of a man who had walked further in soul than most did in body. And though he remained without office, Confucius was never without influence. In his travels, he encountered dozens of future ministers and scholars who would carry his ideas into the bureaucracies of later dynasties. His name spread across villages not with fanfare, but with quiet reverence. He was no longer just a teacher. He had become a living tradition. By the time he returned to his homeland of Lu, Confucius had journeyed not only across the physical map of China, but across the spiritual terrain of the human condition. He had known disappointment, but never despair. He had known solitude, but never bitterness. He had lost comfort, but never his mission. The world had not changed as he had hoped. But he had laid a foundation that no sword could destroy, no regime could silence. For wherever there was a heart that yearned for goodness, wherever there was a mind open to reflection, the voice of Confucius would be heard. When Confucius returned to Lu after years of wandering, he found no throne awaiting him, no decree of recognition, no monument in his honor. Yet what awaited him was something far more lasting, a gathering of devoted minds, ready to learn. His home became his classroom. His disciples became his legacy. There was no marble campus, no royal patronage. There were no walls gilded with gold. What Confucius built was a school of the spirit, a space where ethics were more important than ambition, where thought was more valuable than wealth, and where becoming a good person mattered more than becoming a powerful one. He taught in courtyards, in quiet rooms, beneath trees. There were no entry requirements except a sincere heart and a willingness to learn. He welcomed all, whether they came from noble lineages or humble farms. Is there one who studies and does not grow? He would ask. The doors of the master are open. His students were many, some quiet and thoughtful, others bold and argumentative. Among them were names that would become legendary in their own right. Zilu, brave and hot-tempered. Zigong, eloquent and shrewd. Yan Hui, modest and deeply virtuous, whom Confucius loved like a son. Each brought their strengths and flaws. Each left transformed. Confucius didn't only teach them knowledge, he trained their character. He challenged them. If they boasted, he questioned them. If they doubted, he encouraged. If they failed, he reminded them that learning is not a straight path, but a winding road walked with perseverance. To learn and never be full, he said. To teach and never grow weary. This is the joy of the teacher. His lessons were not abstract theories. They were principles to live by. He spoke of Ren, compassion, humaneness, as the soul of moral life. He emphasized Li, ritual and propriety, not as empty custom, but as the rhythm of a respectful society. He taught Zi, wisdom, not as mere cleverness, but as the clarity to choose what is right. And above all, he spoke of Xin, faithfulness, honesty, the courage to live in alignment with one's word. His classroom was a dialogue, not a dictatorship. I transmit, but I do not invent, he told his students. I trust in the ancients. He saw himself as a bridge between the past and the future, reminding a forgetful age of the truths that once gave it strength. He had no interest in being called a prophet or sage. He was a transmitter, a vessel through which wisdom flowed. He also believed in balance. A gentleman, he said, must be firm but not harsh, humble but not weak, ambitious but not greedy. To be truly cultivated was to be generous in judgment, cautious in speech, and diligent in self-reflection. To serve others, but never lose oneself. The gentleman seeks harmony, not conformity, he reminded them. His students would memorize his sayings, debate his ideas, reflect on his life. And over time, they would compile his teachings into the Analects, a collection of simple, profound exchanges that would become one of the most influential books in human history. These dialogues, curious, candid, often poetic, preserved not just what Confucius said, but how he thought, how he responded, how he lived. The classroom of Confucius was not about creating scholars alone. It was about creating better sons, better ministers, better rulers. He believed that education was the root from which all virtues could grow. That to reform society, one must first reform the self. When we see men of worth, he said, we should strive to be like them. When we see men without worth, we should turn inward and examine ourselves. By the end of his life, Confucius had taught over 3,000 students. Of them, 72 would become renowned for their mastery of his teachings. But more importantly, each carried a piece of the master with them, into courts, into villages, into generations yet to come. He had not built a state. He had built a school. He had not ruled a kingdom. He had ruled hearts. And through the steady echo of his disciples' footsteps, Confucius had done what he had always dreamed, to create a world where virtue could lead, even without a crown. Confucius was more than a teacher of morals. He was a philosopher of balance. In a world torn between extremes, between indulgence and rigidity, between ambition and apathy, he offered a path that was neither passive nor aggressive. He called it the way of the mean. The doctrine of the mean, or zhongyang in Chinese, is one of the most subtle and profound elements of Confucian thought. It does not preach mediocrity. It does not ask us to choose the average. Instead, it guides us toward harmony, a life lived with conscious moderation, with integrity, and with awareness of context. To Confucius, virtue was not a fixed set of rules, but a living response to each moment. A good man must be like a skilled musician, not playing too loudly nor too softly, but adjusting his notes to the rhythm of life. The superior person, or Junzi, was not one who never erred, but one who recognized imbalance and gently corrected course. He taught that the highest virtue is consistency, acting rightly not out of convenience, but out of character. to be balanced in speech, in emotion, in action, not because it is easy, but because it is wise. Excess is as wrong as deficiency, he would say. The way is not far from man. If a man pursues it, he will find it close by. The Junzi, or the noble person, was the ideal Confucian figure, not noble by birth, but by behavior. The Junzi lives by principle, not by passion. He is humble in success, dignified in hardship. He reflects before acting, listens before speaking, and leads by example. He is not perfect, but he strives. He is not revered for wealth, but for virtue. To become a Junzi, one must cultivate the self, through study, reflection, and discipline. But Confucius did not stop there. The transformation of the self was only the first ripple in a larger pond. The self influences the family shapes the village affects the state, and the state models the world. That was the Confucian progression: self, family, society, world. Confucius believed that morality was contagious. Just as a foul odor spreads, so too does a noble spirit. A virtuous ruler inspires virtuous ministers. A kind father raises compassionate sons. A respectful son becomes a trustworthy official. Society was not a machine of laws. It was a mirror of character. And the clearest mirror was the home. In his philosophy, the family is sacred. Filial piety, xiao, is not blind obedience. It is the root of gratitude. To honor one's parents is not simply to obey, but to care, to respect, and to uphold the family's dignity. A man who cannot love his parents, Confucius taught, cannot love his people. And a ruler who does not revere his ancestors cannot rule with wisdom. Rituals. Li played an important role in maintaining this balance. They were not empty gestures, but ways to channel emotion into order. A bow, a greeting, an offering at a shrine. Each act was a reminder of one's place in the web of relationships. Rituals were the language of respect. And through them, chaos became rhythm, and ego became humility. Even in grief, there was meaning. The mourning of a parent was not merely a cultural tradition. It was an act of love, of memory, of continuity. In the tears of a son, Confucius saw the strength of civilization. But Confucian balance was not softness. It was strength held with control. Courage with compassion, ambition with restraint. It called upon the individual to stand firm against injustice, but without hatred, to speak truth to power, but without pride, to pursue knowledge, but without arrogance. He warned against extremes in all things, against zealotry, against rigid dogma, against reckless freedom. Do not impose upon others what you do not desire for yourself, he said, a principle that would echo through generations, across cultures, as a foundation of ethics. Confucius never claimed to be inventing a new system. He saw himself as restoring the golden threads of ancient wisdom, lost in the noise of war and corruption. He believed the way, the Tao, was eternal, and that his task was to rediscover it, refine it, and relay it. The doctrine of the mean was his compass. It did not promise glory. It did not promise wealth, but it offered something greater, a life of dignity, clarity, and quiet joy. Through this doctrine, Confucius reminded humanity that the path to greatness is not through conquest, but through cultivation. That the center is not weakness, it is wisdom. And that in a world pulled apart by extremes, balance is not compromise, it is courage. Confucius died in Fevajin BCE at the age of 73, quietly and without ceremony. He passed away not as a ruler, not as a prophet, but as a teacher, surrounded not by armies, but by students. He left behind no kingdom, no monuments, no scroll signed with his name. Yet his words, passed from mouth to mouth, brush to parchment, heart to heart, would build an intellectual and moral empire that would shape the destiny of nations. It began with the Analects, a collection of conversations, memories, and teachings recorded by his disciples. The text was not designed to impress. It was not polished rhetoric. It was simple, candid, fragmented. And yet, within its pages lived the heartbeat of Confucian thought. In those humble lines were lessons on leadership, ethics, education, family, and the human condition. In the centuries that followed, these teachings spread across China and beyond. During the Han Dynasty, Confucianism became the state philosophy. Temples were erected in his honor. His birthday became a day of remembrance. Civil service examinations were based on his teachings, ensuring that those who governed would be well-versed in virtue. The scholar replaced the soldier as the model of leadership. Wisdom, not warfare, became the measure of greatness. But Confucius' ideas were never static. They evolved. They were interpreted, debated, expanded by thinkers like Mencius and Xunzi. Some emphasized the innate goodness of man. Others, the need for discipline and structure. Yet through all the schools and schisms, the core remained. Morality as the foundation of society, self-cultivation as the path to peace, and harmony as the highest human goal. Confucianism became more than a philosophy. It became a way of life. It shaped the architecture of families, the rituals of marriage, the reverence for ancestors. It guided how officials governed and how children were raised. It defined the language of respect, the posture of humility, and the rhythm of daily life. Beyond China, Confucius's influence stretched across Asia. In Korea, his teachings blended with local customs, shaping a strict but harmonious social code. In Japan, Confucian values became embedded in Bushido, the way of the warrior, emphasizing honor, duty, and self-discipline. In Vietnam, they underpinned imperial institutions and educational ideals. Even as empires rose and fell, the voice of Confucius remained. During times of upheaval, his words offered stability. During times of excess, his simplicity reminded rulers of virtue. He became the conscience of kings, the compass of ministers, the ideal of the scholar. But his legacy did not go unchallenged. In modern times, Confucianism faced criticism, accused of upholding patriarchal structures, resisting individualism, or slowing progress. Revolutions burned his statues, mocked his values, and called for new ideals. And yet, even as political winds shifted, Confucius endured, not because of dogma, but because of depth. His vision of a virtuous life was never meant to be rigid. It was meant to be real. It acknowledged human weakness, but aspired toward strength. It accepted suffering, but called for grace. It did not promise heaven. It asked us to do better here on earth. In the modern world, where technology races ahead of wisdom, where voices shout louder than they listen, and where speed often outpaces reflection, the voice of Confucius still whispers, calm and clear: cultivate yourself, honor your family, serve others, seek balance, live with dignity. Universities still teach him, scholars still debate him, but more importantly, families still live by his words. His thought is etched not just in books, but in behaviors. Not only in temples, but in homes. Not only in governments, but in quiet acts of everyday decency. Confucius never asked to be worshipped. He only asked to be understood. And in understanding him, we may better understand ourselves. More than 2 millennia have passed since Confucius walked the dusty roads of Lu, scroll in hand, disciples by his side, and the weight of a fractured world pressing against his calm spirit. Time has carried away the empires he knew. Dynasties have risen and fallen. Philosophies have clashed and merged, and yet, the image of Confucius remains unshaken, enduring, profoundly relevant. He is no longer just a figure of Chinese history. He is a global icon of moral clarity, a voice of reason in the noise of ideology. His name appears in classrooms from Boston to Beijing, not just as a relic of ancient thought, but as a guide for modern living. In times of global crisis, Confucius reminds us that greatness begins with the individual, that before we seek to change the world, we must first learn to govern ourselves. In an age of social fragmentation, his vision of harmony calls us back to dialogue, to empathy, to shared purpose. His teachings on leadership resonate in boardrooms and parliaments alike. He warned against rulers who seek fame over service. who demand loyalty without earning trust. He believed that authority without virtue is like a tree without roots, doomed to fall. These ideas have inspired reformers, educators, civil servants, and even revolutionaries who saw in Confucius not conservatism, but conscience. In a society driven by speed and distraction, Confucius offers a philosophy of reflection. He reminds us to slow down, to ask the deeper questions, to recognize the sacred in the ordinary. A bow to an elder, a word of thanks, a moment of stillness, these are not empty acts. They are the fabric of civilization. Technology may evolve, but human nature remains. And it is in that nature that Confucius placed his greatest faith. He believed we were capable of becoming better, not through miracles, but through effort, not through punishment, but through example, not by rising above others, but by rising within ourselves. Confucius never claimed perfection. He spoke of his own flaws. He admitted his limitations. And in doing so, he became even more relatable, even more human. He was not a god. He was not a prophet. He was a man who looked at the disorder of his time and chose not to retreat, but to respond with wisdom, patience, and relentless hope. Today, statues of Confucius stand in cities around the world. His words are carved into stone, recited at ceremonies, referenced in policy, and quietly echoed in daily life. But his true legacy does not lie in monuments or manuscripts. It lives in every teacher who uplifts, every leader who governs with humility, every citizen who chooses virtue over vanity. In his final years, when asked if he had achieved success, Confucius replied not with pride, but with purpose. At 15, I set my heart on learning. At 30, I stood firm. At 40, I had no more doubts. At 50, I understood the will of heaven. At 60, I heard it with ease. At 70, I could follow my heart without breaking the rules. That journey from learning to wisdom, from uncertainty to serenity, is the path he offers to all of us. Confucius died as he lived, quietly, humbly, and without fanfare. But his echo has grown louder with every passing generation. In the East, he is revered. In the West, he is studied. And across the globe, his teachings continue to light the way through darkness, confusion, and conflict. He is the philosopher who became a teacher, the teacher who became a symbol, the symbol who became a legacy. Confucius was not only the sage of his time, he is the sage of all time. He came into the world with no wealth, no title, no army, and no crown. He left it the same way. And yet few have ever left a deeper imprint. Confucius did not conquer lands. He conquered hearts. He did not build palaces. He built minds. He did not command armies. He cultivated virtue. He taught in silence. He led without force. He lived without fame, and yet earned immortality. Not in monuments of stone, but in the values that still guide us. In how we speak, in how we listen, in how we serve, in how we live. His was a life of questions, of discipline, of example. A life that believed in balance, in harmony, in the quiet strength of self-cultivation. Today, the world he knew is gone. The feudal states have faded. The emperors he advised are dust. But his words remain, his thought remains, his spirit remains. Wherever a child bows to a parent with respect, wherever a leader governs with humility, wherever a teacher awakens a mind, there the soul of Confucius endures. His life reminds us that true greatness does not shine like a sword. It glows like a lantern, quiet, steady, enduring. He was not just a philosopher of the past, he is a voice for the future. He was the sage of 10,000 generations. He was the eternal teacher. He was Confucius,